This is Election 2022 featuring New Mexico House District 32. I'm Anthony Moreno. Thank you for joining us. KRWG Public Media and the League of Women Voters are pleased to present this forum. The rules for this forum are simple. The candidate has up to 90 seconds to answer each question and should not mention their opponent in the answer. My co-moderator for this forum is Kim Sorensen with the League of Women Voters of Southern New Mexico. And we welcome Democratic incumbent candidate for House District 32, Candie Sweetser. We did invite District 32 Republican House candidate Jennifer Jones to participate, but she informed us she could not attend due to a prior commitment. Okay, let's start with the questions. We're going to begin with public safety. Representative Sweetser, public safety has been a concern for many New Mexicans in recent years. What are some state legislative initiatives that you would support to improve public safety in New Mexico?
Well, there are a lot of alternative approaches to what we should be doing, but the overall issue is we have got to do something about our uncontained crime. In my area, we have a little bit different view than we have, say, in some of the more urban areas, but we still have issues with crime. So one of the things I sponsored last legislative session was a bill to stop the automatic release, if you will, the catch and release that many people say is contributing to our high crime. And it would have just been a slight carve out in the bail reform that voters passed several years ago that would have used propensity to perpetuate crime as one reason that a judge could contain criminals once they've been arrested. Because what law enforcement is telling us in our area and in the more urban areas as well is that we have the same criminals. They are caught, they are taken before a judge, they are released on their own recognizance, and they commit more crimes before they appear again. So part of the issue is once they're caught, all studies show that a deterrent to crime is consequences. So they have to be caught, and then they have to know there will be consequences. And that may be where we're falling down on the threshold there of saying, when you are caught, you will be held in jail, you will be held accountable unless there are certain circumstances. I do think that the voters were right in saying you shouldn't be held in jail just because you can't make bail. But what's happened is no one is held in that period, and consequently we see an uptick in crime.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to our second question.
Thank you. Okay, Representative, some have criticized New Mexico for not doing enough to address mental health in the state. There are limited state-run facilities available to serve a large, diverse geographical area that faces economic challenges. What are some top things state lawmakers can do to improve mental health resources in the state?
And as you know, that's a consequence of a breakdown we had several years ago when there was an allegation of Medicaid fraud in our mental health facilities. And so the whole network basically became dissolved. Since I have served the last 6 years, that has been on everyone's radar. I was not there when the breakdown occurred, but since then, it's on everyone's radar, especially in rural New Mexico. But the problem is employees. We are not having enough people who want to go into the mental health field, who want to go into social work, to fill all of the spots that we have, and certainly not enough to cover the entire state. So there's several things that we're doing, and one of them is looking at a pathway to help people, encourage students, to help people either return to the field or encourage students to want to major in those kinds of social work and mental health fields. And I think it's going to be successful. We're doing the same thing with education and teacher pipeline, and we're doing the same thing with public safety. And those pipelines take time. We're here on a campus at New Mexico State University, so hopefully we are reaching students who might want to go into those fields, but they have, and in the field of mental health, either a master's or a doctorate in front of them. So they have time in front of them, but hopefully at least part of that pathway is going to be paved, I guess, with these incentives for people to go in these fields that are hard to staff now.
Thank you.
There's a saying that water is life. As New Mexico continues to face a historic drought, experts are warning of a future with less water being available. What can state lawmakers do to address our water future so future generations will have enough of this precious resource?
And I serve on the Water and Natural Resources Interim Committee, and we've already had several meetings on this exact topic, as we have every year. Water is life in New Mexico and in the desert, and so we are looking at all kinds of things, including metering wells. And right now in the Rio Grande corridor, wells are metered. Irrigation wells, agricultural wells, but off of that corridor, many are not. And so that's one of the issues that we're looking at. And many farmers in my area welcome that because they're following all the rules and they're using only the water that they're allocated. And they say, meter us, we know it. But that's one of the things that we're going to, and it's not inexpensive, so that's one of the things we're having to look at. And the other, as you know, is we have paid farmers not to farm. And while that may seem a great short-term solution, ultimately we do not want to be a country that imports all of our food. So if we are paying our farmers not to farm really good farmland and we are importing all of our food, we're putting ourselves in a very precarious position as a country. So we're going to have to do some balancing, I think. And you're here in a valley with a lot of pecan trees that use a lot of water, but that's also one of our high-value crops. You can't blame farmers for wanting to plant those trees, but we have to look at how much water all of our crops are using. And so that's part of the issue. And again, we're looking at yards and green lawns that we all love, all of that greenery. New Mexico State has a lot of nice green, but those are all water users. So you have to kind of figure there's got to be a balance in when you live in an arid climate like we do on how much we can actually water.
New Mexico continues to struggle with child well-being in the state. The state created an early childhood education and care department to take on this issue. What do you think state lawmakers can do to address issues facing child well-being in New Mexico?
Oh, great question. And that is one of those areas where we're working on a pipeline to also get high quality, good early education professionals into the field. I was selected for an NCSL, which is National Conference of State Legislators Child Welfare Fellow Program. And so I've attended a meeting in Seattle. We've had 2 Zooms, and I have a meeting next month in Denver. But one of the things we're looking at is, what are we doing? How are we helping our youngest children, our most vulnerable children? In addition to the ECECD program that you set up, department that we set up, we have been funneling a lot of money to early childhood education. And there'll be a ballot initiative in November to add even more to that from the permanent fund. So I don't think it's a matter of funding. I think it's a matter of having an attractive program that parents and guardians want to put their children in. And then it's a matter of educating parents. It all starts at home. We have got to get our parents clued into how important those early years are for education, for development, for mental health, for self-esteem, for nurturing, and all of the things that will make a child ready to actually start full school.
Okay, now we're moving on to some questions about education. Education continues to be a challenge facing New Mexico. What are efforts that you would support to improve education in our state?
So I serve on the House Education Committee as well as the Appropriations and Finance Committee. So always it comes down to, at least since I've been there, the lawsuit. And the lawsuit that governs where we can spend our money and whether we're putting enough resources in. And the courts have said we're not. We are not putting enough resources in. How much is enough? Well, we're not going to tell you that. We just know you're not doing enough. So we have all of these bills that are really helping to focus on, native language, making sure native speakers get good curriculum in their native language, all kinds of different programs that are helping them, as well as, again, trying to get good qualified teachers in the classroom. So basically what happens in the school system is that when children are engaged in a good classroom with a high quality teacher, they gain about a year's worth of education. The problem is if they start behind. So if they start behind kindergarten, from kinder to first, they're going to get a year's worth. But if they're not ready for kindergarten, they're behind. So if they're 3rd and 4th, but they're only in the 1st grade academic level, they may get to 2nd grade, but then they're going on to 4th or 5th grade. So we've got to get our children ready to start, and then we have to continue those gains all the way through. And COVID didn't help, of course.
Thank you. You kind of addressed this next question, but you might want to expand on this. School staffing shortages are impacting many communities in our country. What do you think state lawmakers can do to ensure that New Mexico will have enough teachers in the future?
One of the things we've done, as you well know, is increase teacher salaries, and that's what we were told needed to happen. And we now, after the last legislative session, have the highest teacher salaries in our region. That's something New Mexico has not been able to brag about in decades. Of course, I'm guessing that our neighbors are going to increase theirs, and we're going to be behind again. So it's always a little bit of a race to keep up. But having good salaries to attract good quality teachers are a huge issue. But it's not just teachers in the classroom. And one of the biggest shortages are for substitutes. And one of the reasons people tell me that they have not wanted to continue substituting in the classroom is the discipline of the children. And that's terrible. They say, well, you're in those classrooms, you are treated poorly, and it's at all levels from K to 12. And they said, we don't have to take that. So I've talked to many educators, and they say, we need really good quality substitutes. And so, we've got to look back again at the family and that early raising and that early development and manners and all of those things to make sure that students understand they can't abuse a substitute just because their teacher's not in the classroom.
Okay, New Mexico's workforce has been challenged as the state has been losing its working age population. What are some things that state lawmakers can do to help keep working age people in New Mexico?
Yeah, so we've got a struggle, and the nation does, right, in getting workers. I've traveled a little bit over the last couple of years, and there's not a community that I've gone into that hasn't had, openings, jobs available, blah, blah, blah. The business owners, and I'm a business owner myself of over 30 years, and the challenge that we face is that people are reanalyzing whether they want to have two incomes in their home. And so our society and our job market has been based on both parents working. But some of these problems we've just been discussing about issues at home and children and competency and feeling loved and nurtured and successful at home is coming back to people having been home at COVID, realizing the input and the influence they can have on their children if one parent is at home with them more. And so we have this kind of issue. We lost a lot of people during COVID, and then we also had kind of this realignment of whether we want to always be two-income households. And I think that we're in an adjustment period. I think that businesses are going to have to figure out technologically what they can do, and then we're also going to have to figure out, do we still want to have a society based on two-income parents? And if not, we have to restructure our workforce. Thank you.
Thank you.
State lawmakers have worked in recent years to create tax incentives and rebates for the film industry in New Mexico. Do you support these efforts? Also, are there other ways to create a sustainable future with this industry without depending heavily on taxpayers?
Good question. So we have had many very lively discussions in the legislature about the tax rebates. And my number one problem with them, I think, is that we are not seeing them down in our level. Occasionally you'll see a movie's being done in Las Cruces, but very rarely in Luna or Hidalgo counties, where most of my constituents are. And my colleagues in rural areas across the state say the same thing. Most of those movies are being done in Albuquerque and Santa Fe. When I first started in the legislature, they said, well, we have to offer these tax credits because all the other states are. So, it's a draw, right? So Hollywood, they're trying to figure out, do I get a best rate in Georgia? Do I get the best rate in Oklahoma? Do I get the best rate in New Mexico? Then we have this other recruitment issue going on that says, no, you don't have the same scenery and the same talent pool that you have in Georgia or Oklahoma that you have in New Mexico. So are the tax credits really that big of a deal? And I think that we need to look at that, honestly, because I think we have a lot of draw here where we can recruit good, high-quality jobs in the film industry without putting it on the taxpayers, without having those incentives. I hope we can.
All right, we're moving on to the next question. Lawmakers in New Mexico do not get paid a salary. They do receive a per diem for help with travel expenses, but do not make a salary. Do you support efforts to pay New Mexico state representatives and state senators a full-time salary, yes or no?
Yes. Part of the salary issue is just the modernization of our legislature. And so I feel we have a pretty antiquated system with no staff and no pay. So we do get mileage and per diem, but the job takes a considerable amount of time. So it comes down to, do we want to be a legislature of mostly retirees? That's what we are now. Or do we want also people who can hold who must hold other jobs, and in that case they would need a salary. So our legislature is made up of a lot of attorneys and other self-employed, which I consider myself to be, a lot of retirees, and then Albuquerque public school teachers. Other school districts do not grant their teachers leave for 60 and 30 days, but the Albuquerque public school does. So we have a high percentage of Albuquerque public school teachers. But is that all we want? Is that the pool we want for lawmakers to be able to serve? I don't think so. So we have to look at whether we can recruit other people with a salary and whether New Mexico can afford it. And as you know, we have volatile revenue here with oil and gas and other inputs that we can't always count on. So the issue is, can we afford it? But I think even more important than legislator salaries is staff, because we really count on lobbyists and other people to give us input because we don't have any staff. So it's an overall issue of modernizing our legislature.
There have been calls for reforming the Public Employee Retirement Association in New Mexico. Currently, members are not required to have relevant qualifications specific to pensions or investment fund management. The PARA board oversees a trust fund that has a value of over $17 billion. Do you support efforts to reform this board? If so, how?
I'll be honest, that's not an area that I've really looked at very much, but I can tell you that they have highly qualified, highly paid advisors advising them. So to say that the board is directing that level of investment is maybe a little bit misleading. They get a lot of input from professionals in that field. So I'll be, like I said, it's not an area that I've really looked at a lot, but I do think that we need input from people who know how the process works and have, vested interest in making sure that it's successful. And I do think the staff does that well.
Okay, next question. New Mexico taxpayers spent at least $220 million to build and support Spaceport America. Do you feel New Mexico taxpayers are getting a return on their investment? Please explain.
So I was just in TRC yesterday, actually, for the New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority Oversight Committee, and we had the Spaceport America CEO in front of us. And the issue that they addressed really was the tax burden that's on Doña Ana and Sierra County people specifically, because they had invested, as you know, gross receipts tax to build the facility, and sometimes that money has been used for other operations at the facility. The argument being every other state agency spreads that tax burden around the whole state. The whole state did supplement, of course, the building of Spaceport America, and we continue to the tunes of millions of dollars. When I first entered the legislature, I was unaware of what a prime location we have in terms of airspace. Because I'll be honest, I was not a big fan of Spaceport America, and I thought, what are we doing here in the middle of the desert? But when you look at the map of all of the airlines or air paths over the U.S., we have this little nice hole because of white sands. So Spaceport America was built at the edge of that, where they have an amazing little opening for air traffic control. So I guess I think we could really utilize that Spaceport America, and I have confidence that they're doing their very best to it. Whether we're actually getting our money out of it or not, I would probably say no at this point. But it's not that I think we should scrap it. I think we have some potential there, some potential for high-paying jobs, which ultimately is what New Mexico needs to bring. The issue is, the question was, are we getting our tax money? And I would say no.
Okay, thank you. Would you support a constitutional amendment to place redistricting in the hands of an independent commission? Why or why not?
There have been both sides on that. One is that we're giving up our responsibility to do what the Constitution tells us we should do, which is redistrict every 10 years after the census. On the other hand, we all have a vested interest in our own districts. So I think I would support it. I don't feel that we're giving up our responsibility if we do a competent replacement for it. What we did this year, as you know, was sort of a hybrid. So we had an independent commission, but then ultimately it came back to us to vote. You'll have critics say we threw out what the independent commission did, but we did not. There were some tweaks, I'll admit, but we did not throw the whole thing out. One tweak was in my legislative district. Luna County has always been a whole district. Used to be only Luna County. Then it became Luna and Hidalgo with a little bit of Grant. Well, in the first map that came out of redistricting, they carved a pie-shaped section out of Luna County and gave it to Grant County. And that would have been the first time in history that New Mexico, or that Luna County had been divided, in recent history, I should say. And so that was one that I said, wait a minute, you've got contiguous neighborhoods, you've got, like-minded voters, why are we separating that? And those were a few of the tweaks that were done all around, but we didn't throw the whole thing out. So the hybrid, I thought, worked well. Maybe we need to go a step further and remove ourselves. It's worth talking about.
Okay, now we're going to move on to the next question, and you touched on this a little bit. Do you support extending the length of legislative sessions beyond the current 30 days in even years and 60 days in odd years? Why or why not?
So I do think we have to look at a modernization of the legislature. I'm not positive that does involve lengthening the sessions. There's been one argument that we should have two 45-day sessions, but the advantage of a 30-day session every 2 years is the focus, that it's only budget focused. And so if we had two 45-day sessions that had wide-ranging calls, wide-ranging topics that could be addressed, I think that we would end up in an issue of time. I think we need to modernize our legislature. I'm not sure we need to professionalize it. In other words, I would not want to run for office and have to live in Santa Fe. I don't want to be up there 6 months out of the year or however long it is. We do that to our DC people. They represent our area, but they live in DC, right? They lose touch. I don't want to lose touch with my constituents. So, while we may look at changing some of the structure, I'm not sure I want it to be a full-time legislature. In fact, I know I don't. I want us to maintain our roots at home.
What, if anything, should be done to make the legislative process more transparent to citizens? Explain.
It is really transparent, and I served on the New Mexico Foundation of Open Government board for a while, and I'm very much, in favor of transparency. All of our interim meetings are webcast. During COVID, we did an amazing job of getting public input from all over the state through webcasting and through Zoom links similar to Zoom. And so I think people have an amazing ability to access the information that we're doing. All of our documents are posted online, all of our handouts are there. I have never had anyone say that they did not know what was going on unless they chose not to go, chose not to research it. Now, it's arguable that not all parts of New Mexico have broadband. Not all parts of New Mexico have access to the internet to be able to search it. But we are working on that with our broadband expansion efforts, and even in northern New Mexico with chapter houses, they have chapter houses where residents can go if they want to access things at the legislature. So I think we are a very transparent legislature. Can we do more? Probably, but I think we're really on the right track.
What actions, if any, should the legislature take to strengthen and or diversify the New Mexico economy?
At the end of the day, it comes down to our workforce. People like to say our tax structure is anti-business, that this is anti-business, that is anti-business. But in the 6 years that I have really been engaged in this process, almost every entity that has not come to New Mexico has said they haven't come because we don't have the workforce. So it comes down to the availability of people, the education of people, the training of people. And so one of the things we can do, obviously, is try to match our workforce to industry that we'd like to recruit. I think we're doing that. I think our higher education institutions are very aware of that. But at the end of the day, we have to have people. We're 2.1 million people. We're small. And so people come in and they look at an overall percentage of workforce availability, and we just don't have it. We're small. So we're going to have to look at more cottage industry type recruitment instead of saying, we're going to get another Facebook or another Google, which we've been able to get at our more metropolitan areas. Can we get that in Luna or Hidalgo counties? No, we don't have the availability of people. And I'm not sure we want to become that populated, frankly. So we have to work with what we have, and I think make sure that we do have incentives to bring that kind of industry here that would be able to take advantage of the workforce pool that we have.
What are your thoughts on public and private prisons, as well as detention centers in New Mexico? Please explain.
So I honestly have no problem with privately run prisons. I have met many of the operators. They are people who adhere to the same rules and regulations that the public prisons have. in my tenure, we have been able to transition some of those private prisons to public prisons, and it's been seamless. So I guess I feel like, again, the availability of the workforce, the salaries that they're offering, if we can control all of that and offer those good paying jobs through our public prisons, that's great. If we're unable to fill that need and we have to contract out to private prisons, I don't have a problem with it. I mean, they know what they're doing. We have a lot of public-private partnerships in New Mexico, and frankly, I think we need more of them. So at the end of the day, if either system is treating prisoners inhumanely, we need to address that. But I don't think it's fair to just point to private and say they do it and public doesn't.
Okay, unfortunately, we are out of time. We want to thank you so much for joining us for the District 32 New Mexico State Representative Candidate Forum. Of course, we want to thank our incumbent candidate, District 32 Democratic candidate, State Representative Candie Sweetser. Thank you to our co-moderator, Kim Sorensen, and the League of Women Voters of Southern New Mexico. I'm Anthony Moreno. Again, thank you for joining us, and remember, Election Day is Tuesday, November 8th.